Hello, good evening, and welcome back to my channel. This is another episode of Healing Waters. I am Adina. Um, and again, thank you guys for clicking on this video and for even patronizing my page. Um, so, of course, I know I always start a video with saying that I promise that I won't be too long on these videos, even though they always end up going a little bit longer than I anticipate. However, the information is really good that I share if you are interested in the information that I do share. So, with that being said, tonight I want to pick up a little bit where I left off last week. I thought that last week's video would be sufficient to discuss Chiron in not just my birth chart, but anyone's birth chart. However, as I was researching my birth chart from last week up until this week to prepare for my next topic, which was actually going to be on the nodes, the North and South node, I realized that there was still things that I needed to preface before I moved on, especially things concerning Chiron. So I felt that it wouldn't be doing my due diligence to move on so quickly, especially if I want to set the stage for the rest of um, the story with Healing Waters and as it pertains to my natal chart and anybody's natal chart. A lot of us share these same placements, which is a good place to start with the next aspect that I'll be discussing more in depth today. Just give me 1 second. I have my tea and my favorite mug, Unstoppable, because that is she, that is me. So let me just sip some tea. I encourage everyone to have a glass of something, water, tea, wine, whiskey, whatever. Get comfortable, get yourself situated and relaxed so that we can chat, because this isn't going to be a video where I'm just going to be throwing out random facts and information. This is interactive in a way that I am teaching or discussing aspects in a natal chart. And some of this may be new to you and some of this may not be. However, the way I'm going about it is to use myself as a case study. And sometimes that involves using my family and my friends around me, but for the most part, I won't be too invasive in their information. My chart, however, I am going to comb through it in as much depth and detail as I can allow, as my vulnerability allows, and I'll even challenge myself in order to really give you guys the truth. So with that being said, Uranus opposition to Chiron, that is what we will be discussing today. I ended my previous video, Healing Waters versus 1, touching on the Uranus opposition to Chiron aspect. And I didn't go more into depth with it because it is a generational aspect, which means that it doesn't just affect the year that I was born, it affects an entire generation. So the opposition to Chiron and Uranus began in 1950 and it ended in 1986. So if you were born within that 39 to 40 year period, you most likely have this aspect in your chart. And if you were born before or after, you still can feel the effects of this aspect in your chart and in your life just because you are in a close proximity with the people of this generation. So even if you don't have it in your chart, or if you fall outside of the dates, excuse me, if you fall outside of the dates, I'm sorry, one more second. This tea, I don't know if it's the tea or the spaghetti that I just ate, but something's producing gas in my chest. However, what was okay, so even if you don't fall within that time period, I think I was saying that you still um, would feel the effects of this aspect because you would have parents that fell in this generation, or you would have siblings, older siblings that fell in this generation, cousins, family members, period. So even if you're outside of 86 or outside of 1950, you still will feel the effects of this aspect. Now, um, as I was doing my research, one of the terms that kept popping up was the generation of the wounded healer. And in my previous video, I mentioned how Chiron is considered the wounded healer, not just in astrology, but in Greek mythology, as Chiron itself was a teacher, an astrologer, and a healer. So Chiron, today, if you were to encounter Chiron, Chiron would probably be doing something that I do now, what I'm doing right here, right now, but on a grand scale. Chiron would be one of the sages or the wise teachers that we look up to, that many of us might not have readily access to because he would be so, renowned, so celebrated. But we would identify Chiron by something like this. Chiron would be teaching about metaphysics. Chiron would be teaching about a higher state of consciousness. Chiron would be teaching about healing and acts of selfless service. Chiron would be teaching about astrology and about natal charts. This is what Chiron would be doing. Um, so this generation of Uranus opposition to Chiron is called the generation of the wounded healer. And that is for multiple reasons. Now, as I mentioned, this is a transit that lasts for about 39 to 40 years. And it's considered rare, for one, because it lasts so long. Most transits involving our personal planets, which would be your sun, moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, the famous seven. These transits last anywhere from a day or two, with the sun and the moon transits, to a few days to a few weeks to a few months. Um, Saturn can Saturn's transits last generally the longest because it is the farthest away from the sun, so it takes more time to orbit the sun. However, these transits are generally a lot shorter than the transits of our interpersonal planets, which would be starting with Uranus, and then it would go to Pluto and then Neptune. One moment. Um, so Neptune being the farthest away, Uranus, I think, being the second or the first farthest away after Saturn. And what those mean by interpersonal planets, meaning we can't see them with the naked eye. So they're so far away, we can't see them with the naked eye, and they don't necessarily have an effect over our day-to-day activities. They have an effect over our lives generally, or lifetimes, or our generations. So the effects are felt of these planets, but not as closely as the planets that are closer to our nucleus or the sun. Um, those will have a tremendous effect on things that you do every day, things that you do every week, which is why those are the planets that are used in predictive astrology mostly, meaning you would track those transits to predict events in your life, or predict when you should do certain events or things like that. However, these transpersonal planets, as I said, you can't see them with the naked eye, but their effects are felt. So they are like the subconscious planets. Um, they influence our lives, but in a way where it's not seen or felt with the senses. I like to call them the psychic planets because psychic activity, it's there, it's a force. I'm so sorry, you guys. I don't know what's wrong with my chest, but maybe I should have waited a few minutes in between eating to drink some tea and do this video. However, here I am. Anyways, they're like psychic planets, meaning they play on our subconscious. They play on our psyche and our spirit beings, our soul, but not necessarily the physical, touchy things that you can touch and feel and be consciously aware of. You'll probably be consciously aware of a Mars transit because your energy may be heightened. You may see increased physical activity. You may have an increase of energy as far as anger or aggression or determination, ambition, anything Mars related. But Uranus, you're going to feel that in a way where it doesn't directly impact you in the same way. It's felt more on a subconscious level, or when a personal planet transits one of those planets. The effects that they have are generally more transformative or karmic, which leads me to say that Uranus and Pluto and Neptune are planets that I believe represent, well, not just me, but many astrologers and students of astrology represent karmic or karma within one's life, within one's generation, or within the collective, um, or woven amongst all three realms. Um, so if I am looking at my chart and I want to take a look at um, my karma from this life or from a previous life, or things that my soul um, experienced before but didn't learn all the lessons for, or things that my soul needs to experience in order to evolve, I'm going to look at Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune in my chart, because these, since they're planets that represent other dimensions, karma, and things beyond the veil, things outside of our senses, that's going to tell me about things that are playing into my life that I'm not conscious of, but impact my life, impacted my parents' lives, may impact my children's lives. So that is why these are karmic, because it doesn't just deal with you, it deals with the generation. And many of us have heard of the term a generational curse, but it's not necessarily a curse. I like to call it generational karma. It could be a curse if someone did take it upon themselves to hex you or your family or your lineage, or hex someone in your lineage, and that went on without being reconciled or removed. That can absolutely play a part in making a generational curse, but more than less, it is skipped lessons For instance, your great-great-grandmother may have been supposed to learn a certain lesson in her life. And that lesson wasn't fully learned or actualized in her lifetime. So her child then is born with that same lesson in their lifetime's karma, or the ramifications of their parent not learning that lesson. So even if the lesson doesn't show up for their child to learn, the consequences or the ramifications of missing that step most likely will be felt in their offspring's chart. And then it can either show up again for them to learn that lesson, or that lesson will continue to be skipped or passed down within that lineage until someone is born that actualizes it or reconciles that karmic lesson. And then that curse is broken, or that karma or that karmic cycle can now be closed, and the entire lineage can evolve into a new cycle of karmic lessons, whether it be here on this earth or whether it be in another realm or dimension. However, this is the reality of a generational curse or generational karma. So I like to give a preface to that. Excuse me one more time. Because this Uranus opposition to Chiron, as I said, is a generational placement. And I just have to explain a little bit of what this opposition means. Because in this generation, or in this lifetime, the one that I live in and the one that is current to my life, meaning my generation, my parents' generation, and my siblings, just by proximity. We will see two rare generational aspects in this lifetime. One being this Uranus opposition to Chiron, and the other being a Pluto sextile to Neptune. And that is a generation of 1950 to 2032. Now, because both of these rare aspects occur in this lifetime or in this generation, it would draw more attention to what they mean, because we will not see another aspect or transit like that within interpersonal planets, rare, slow orbiting planets like this within this generation. So that would tell us that this generation has a purpose that involves the Uranus opposition to Chiron and the Pluto sextile to Neptune. If these are the two transits that are rare, that take place in this generation, in this lifetime, they mean something important, not just to us individually, but to our generation collectively. So that is why I wanted to touch on these before I move forward with my own personal involving aspects and transits, because next I would go to, as I mentioned, my nodes, and that deals with purpose and karmic lessons as well. However, it's a little bit more personal. So Uranus opposition to Chiron is the generation of 1950 to 1989. Now, these transits only happen when planets with eccentric or slow-moving orbits interact with a similar planet. So as I said, any of the interpersonal planets, your nodes, your Chiron, Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, any of those that interact with each other are considered rare because they take so long to orbit the sun that they only take place in generations. And what makes them rare is if two of these slow moving eccentric planets interact with each other in one generation, which is what happened between 1950 and starting in 1950 when Uranus started opposing Chiron. Now, Chiron generally orbits between Saturn and Uranus. So Saturn would be the planet farthest from the sun um, before you get to the far off planets, which I mentioned Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune. Saturn is the last planet that we can see with our naked eye. So it is the last of the personal planets. Um, and so you have Saturn, which is the last of the personal planets. And then you have Uranus, which is the beginning of what I like to consider another dimension, something that is outside of our consciousness or our ability to perceive or to perceive in a conscious way this planet. We know it's there because we have the technology that allows us to see it now. We know that it affects us um, because we can attract the effects on the Earth as it regards to the orbit of these planets. However, we can't see them. So Saturn you can see, it's the last one that you can see, and then Uranus begins. So it's almost like Saturn, which also rules or is the lord of time, matter, limitation. Saturn was considered God in ancient religions just because it was the furthest away from the sun, meaning it was in the heavens, and it ruled the earthly realm, okay? Because they couldn't see the other planets. Whether they knew that they existed or not, which we know in Egypt, and probably prior to Egypt, they did know. It's just that these planets were officially recognized or discovered later on. However, the ancients used to consider Saturn as the god of this realm simply because it was um, the planet furthest away from this realm, but it was the lord of these dimensions, time, matter. It gave limitations to Earth. It gave limitations and restrictions and a systematic approach to life on Earth. Whereas once you leave Saturn, you're in a whole nother dimension where Saturn has no rulership over. Time is different. If it exists at all, in these other dimensions and realms, we have less tangible knowledge about what goes on these planets because they're so ethereal and they're so far away that we as human beings can't reach them. Our souls, however, are without bounds. But because we are spirits and souls trapped or confined within not just the limitations of our flesh, but the limitations of this realm, um, they go beyond our perception. So they represent transcendence, transcendence. One second. Excuse me if I chopped and screwed that word, guys. I'm really smart, I promise. So Chiron sits between matter, the seen, and the unseen. And Chiron would be that bridge. So, another dimension to Chiron being the wounded healer, and I kind of mentioned that last week when I gave my introduction to Chiron, is that it gives us the opportunity to transcend our human perception and our human limitation um, through selflessness, through unconditional love and acts of service. I also mentioned in my previous video that love, in my belief, is the most potent and the most strongest powers that we have the capacity to achieve. And I say the capacity because I'm not speaking about a love that is popular in our consciousness right now. It's very superficial, this love. The love that I mean has everything to do with selflessness. And if you cannot comprehend being selfless, then you still cannot comprehend love because it acts with no personal interest. It is a complete, almost martyrdom of oneself, with the belief that your action is serving a purpose higher than even yourself, which is why it is transcendent, because Christ taught self-sacrifice as a way to achieve enlightenment or the Christ consciousness. Remember, Christ is a title. So Christ is, once we reach a certain level of consciousness, it will be considered Christ consciousness. It is the level of consciousness that that Jesus or the Christ, the teacher, came to teach us about. And the way to that and through that was self-sacrifice, selfless acts of self. Christ was um, the quintessential Chiron Christ. He was the quintessential wounded healer, because just as Chiron was wounded in its flesh, but it wasn't a mortal wound, um, he was wounded in his flesh and through his suffering decided, you know what, I see someone else suffering. I'm suffering, so let me take their place so that they can be free. Um, I'm sorry, that is my niece. She is 2, and she is trying to break my door down. She'll probably have a meltdown outside of my door, and you'll probably hear it. I'm just going to wait for this to finish. So I feel horrible for having to ignore her right now, but as I was saying, I was comparing Christ to Chiron because um, same message, different culture, different way of expressing it, but the message is the same. Just like with all ancient texts, they're all speaking of the same concepts, just different times, different languages, different people, different ways of comprehending it. However, Christ and Chiron, they both suffered a mortal wound, um, and suffered a sense of sacrifice after being wounded. Christ was wounded, and supposedly died and was raised in order to save us from our sins. Chiron was wounded and gave himself as well as sort of a sacrificial lamb for, I want to say Persephone. I don't think the Greek terminology or the names in Greek really matter that much, especially to me because I am black, bliggity black. I am African. So Greek 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 titles, they really don't bother or don't matter to me. I don't feel the need to keep up with them because they're just representative of an overall message or a way to give a mental picture or a way for people to understand these concepts when they can't necessarily accept the meat on its own. So with that being said, Chiron also gave itself to in order for someone else. And what happened was in both stories, the gods in the story of Jesus, it was of course one God, and in the story of Chiron, it was a pantheon of gods. But the gods decided to end their suffering and make them. In Chiron's case, he was made a constellation, and in Jesus' Christ, he was made a Christ or a Savior. Uh, but in both stories, the message is that the way, the quickest way to achieve enlightenment of your soul, I don't mean enlightenment that you would get at college. I'm not talking about not even the age of enlightenment, because even then, that was surface level enlightenment that was ripped off and borrowed from someone else's enlightenment. However, I mean soul enlightenment, evolution. It is when your soul has an aha moment and is ready now to evolve past whatever it was stuck on prior to that aha moment. Um, it is when your soul says, aha, this is how I can transcend back towards source. Because all of our souls are just trying to understand source, the creator. In my mind, and this is the way I rationalize God and us, God was like, you know what? I have all of these abilities. I am God. I am God. But I have no way of experiencing any parts of myself outside of creating things. I can create this planet here. I can create this dimension here. I can do all of this, but yet I can't experience any of it. The good, the bad, I can't know myself. I mean, I know what I am. I know what I can do, but how can I actualize myself? How do I comprehend myself? Ah, I know what I'll do. I'll create little me's that can experience me and then come back to me so that I can take it all in. Okay. So God decided to blow itself up in millions of pieces and billions and trillions and gillions of pieces, or not even blow itself up, but take of itself and then put it inside of vessels that had the capacity to experience all of its creation. Not just here on this realm either, but all of its creation has to be experienced. From the sun to Saturn, the parts that we can see, to Uranus and all the other planets and galaxies and asteroids, points, nodes that even we still have yet to find. All of these are meant to be realized or experienced by us. Now, while we're here on Earth, we can only experience a certain aspect of it, the physical and the tangible part. But the purpose of being here is to get our souls to a certain point, a certain level of evolution and consciousness to where now we are able or ready to go experience all the other parts. It's levels to this. It's levels to being a being. And the base of it is what we experience here. Okay? So, with Chiron being the ability to transcend, since Chiron is made of matter and spirit, it's considered a demigod, remember? So, the bottom half of Chiron is animal or animalistic, our lower selves. However, the top portion of Chiron is man, our higher selves, and our ability to transcend our lower selves. So Chiron was wounded in his material part, in his flesh, but the parts most vital to Chiron's being, from, I would say, the solar plexus, the heart, the crown, the mind, all of those hadn't been wounded. So even when you experience a wound in your physical self or in this physical realm, your soul isn't destroyed. And on top of that, that wound can help you learn how to transcend your entire being. It can help you learn how to integrate your lower and your higher selves in order to transcend into more of the Uranian aspect of yourself. So if Chiron was half human, half God, and it sits in the middle of Saturn, which we would consider our human limitation, and Uranus, which we would consider the beginning of another dimension or another realm of ourselves, you can see in Chiron itself, in the story of Chiron itself, how and why it sits in the middle of physical and matter to spiritual, immaterial. The median, though, is what we do with the lessons and the things that we learn while we're in the middle ground, while we're here. Because we all learn things while we're here. But the reason for that, what is the reason for us learning these lessons? And that is because they serve a higher purpose that we're not consciously aware of. Our spirits may be consciously aware of us serving a higher purpose, but we may not be consciously aware of what that purpose is. And Chiron helps us through our painful life experiences. Depending on how we handle those painful experiences, we can transcend. So I'm going to use myself as an example. Last week, I went through many of my Chiron experiences and my placements, and I shared with how they make me who I am, and not just that, but the the amount of Chiron activity that I have in my chart was one of the first clues that I had in finding out my purpose, because I've had so many Chiron experiences, and my Chiron is so active in my life in almost every part of my life. One of my traumatic woundings is going to play a part in every aspect of my life: relationship, work, personal development, all of it. It plays a part in it. And so that's one of the first things that let me know that more than just normal, I am literally here to be a healer and a teacher, because it's through the lessons that I learned through these experiences. I allowed myself to be taught through these experiences. First of all, that's the first step, to allow yourself to be taught through these experiences. And then you find your purpose is to then do something with the lessons that you learn. One of the things that I always say is, all of this pain I experience can't be for nothing. So the only way that I can reconcile a lot of my life's trauma is to say, okay, well, I went through it so that I can help somebody else. That is what gets me through life. It has been what's gotten me through life, even as a child, because if I felt like it was for nothing, I would probably have committed suicide. And I've tried. Um, but that sense of purpose, that sense of saying, okay, well, all of this isn't for nothing because it's so active in my life. So there must be a purpose or something I'm supposed to do with it. So consciously and subconsciously, I seek out opportunities to do something with my chironic experiences. I seek out opportunities to be the wounded healer. And not just do I seek them out, but I attract them. So that is an actualization of the teachings of Christ. Um, it is when you are willing to be wounded and then sacrifice yourself for the greater good of the collective. So every time I do one of these videos, I am personifying Christianity and the teachings of Christ and the teachings of many other of the wise sages and prophets of our time and before our time. But currently, Christianity and the teachings of Christ are still dominant. So those are the terms that I use. However, um, these teachings, these beliefs, they are ancient. They've been in every culture and every age, just under different names. The deities have been given different titles and names based on the different attributes that they have and the different way that cultures relate to these deities. However, let me be clear, the message at the root is the same in all of these deities and gods and goddesses can be sourced back to the same deities. So I know this is off topic, but even whether you call Venus, the planet, Isis, Oshun, um, Inanna, Ishtar, or whatever of the names and whatever other cultures that they're called, they're all talking about the same deity or the same entity. So don't get too caught up on any religious terms that I may use. I do it just to be able to keep the flow of the conversation. However, I'm not confined to any of those terms or any of that because I deal with the bigger picture and the root. So as I was saying that the quickest way to transcend or to be able to transcend your earthly consciousness and begin to have a higher consciousness as it pertains to Uranus and moving onward is through sacrifice, service, selflessness, love. All of those are tied in together into one big package. And with that package, that is the quickest and easiest way to be able to transcend human limitations, which is why Chiron sits in the middle. That's why Christ is considered the mediator between the Father and the Son, between the heavens and the earthly realm, because it literally is in the middle. So whether you call it Chiron, whether you call it Jesus the Christ, whether you call it any other name based on your beliefs, it's all talking about the same concept. And it all ties back to an ancient teaching that came way before our current concepts of religion. It came from the stars, astrology, even the disciples, 12 disciples, 12 zodiac placements. Anyways, um, I'm sorry, I'm just looking at my notes. Okay, so the Uranus opposition to Chiron, I just want to get into that because the reason why we're here. Um, we've already discussed Chiron and we've already discussed a little bit about Uranus and how it starts um, the unseen planets. It's the first one that we can't see after Saturn. Uranus, in my experience, um, as it relates to my personal chart and some of the other experiences that I've seen in other people's charts that I've done or researched, and as I speak to them about some of their placements, um, some of the concepts are the same. And it brought me to the conclusion that Uranus being active or having a good placement in your chart can help speed up your evolution or your soul's evolution through sudden changes that allow the release of karma quickly. Because Uranus can be likened to a bolt of lightning. It's quick. Uranus is the quick flash of genius that you get, or the quick idea that you get that comes and goes, but it's genius. And it's just like it came out of nowhere, or the vision that you just get like, oh my God, like I just saw it flash before my eyes. That is the flash. That is the flash of insight that comes from a higher realm outside of this earth. Saturn is where you go to learn about things beyond the realm. But Uranus is when you begin to experience the things outside of the realm. And it usually comes in a subtle way, unless you're highly attuned to the more subtler realms. That would be your psychics and your mediums and things like that. Hello. So Saturn would be where you go to learn about higher consciousness. Uranus will be where you begin to experience the higher consciousness. So I, for instance, have Uranus in my 8th house of Sagittarius. I live my life getting flashes of insight. And just because of my other placements, it's more than just a flash of insight. I have other planets that work in between to make sure that my insights stay. So that would be considered someone who's called a psychic or a medium, someone who doesn't just get a flash and then it goes on, and then they usually don't have occurrences like this often. This is my natural life. This is my natural day to day. I have heavy 12th house placements. I have heavy Neptune placements. I have a lot of stuff in here that make me very comfortable in the outside realms. Probably a little bit more comfortable um, than my flesh would like me to be, my earthly vessel. And we'll discuss that later too during Healing Waters, because that can be a good thing, but can also be bad when you actually have to live in this realm and survive and have shelter and security and food and things like that. Being not so grounded all the times will pose a problem. However, I have Uranus in my 8th house, and 8th house is another extremely karmic house. It deals with life and death, rebirth, regeneration, transformations, as life and death is, sex and orgasms, the occult, and that's generally because it's traditionally ruled by Pluto. However, I have Uranus here, and I also have Saturn here. So I have both in my 8th house, Uranus, that we were talking about, and Saturn that we were talking about, both in my house of portal. And I like to call the 8th house and the 12th house the houses of portal, as well as the 4th house and the 1st house. Well, not really the 1st house, because the 12th house, I'm just going to stick with the 8th house and the 12th house, just because the 8th house represents life and death, and the 12th house also deals with one's death, can be seen in the 12th house. And it's ruled by Neptune, and it's the last house of the zodiac. So it's literally the house where you are leaving this realm, whether you're going to start another one in the 1st house all again, or whether you're going to leave and then go somewhere beyond Neptune. So those are my portal houses. So I have Saturn and Uranus in my 8th house. And for me, because it deals with the cycles of life, unlike the 12th house, it's not life and death. It's generally just death in the subconscious and what you're doing in your subconscious and your soul, as it relates to detaching. The 8th house, though, is death and life, life and death. It is the infinity symbol, which is why it's the 8th house. The snake swallowing its own tail, because it's a cycle. It's a repetitive cycle. 8. This is a cycle that doesn't stop because it's 8. Okay, that is why it is a portal house, and that's why it represents transformation and regeneration, because it represents the cycles of endings and beginnings. Not just endings like the 12th house, but endings and beginnings. 8th house. I have Uranus and Saturn there. This would let me know, or this would tell me, just based on the way that I interpret karmic astrology, is that So I say that this is a generational placement, the Uranus opposition to Chiron, but not everyone has it in their eighth house. For me, having it in my eighth house would mean that whatever I am meant to do involving Saturn and Uranus and Chiron, it is karmic in a sense where it is passed down through my lineage. Okay, so I'm going to say this, and if you're watching this video and you aren't familiar with terms of being reborn, reincarnation, incarnations, or previous or post incarnations, I ain't the person for you. None of my videos will be for you because these are terms that I will use often. But having this in my eighth house will let me know that I came here, or I was reborn. Okay, I was reborn to do this job because it was not being completed within my ancestral lineage. So I was reborn to come here and do this specific job, not just for my lineage, but for the collective. So this generation, and the Pluto and Scorpio generation, which coincides with this one a little bit. I don't have the dates on that generation, but they coincide. Let me see. Pluto and Scorpio generation, 1983 to 1995. So I would say, I not only fit into the Pluto and Scorpio generation, but I fit into the Uranus opposition to Chiron and the Pluto sextile Neptune generation. I had mentioned the Pluto and Scorpio generation, which is 1983 to 1985, because it has been said and agreed upon by a lot of karmic astrologers that this is the generation of reborn ascendant masters, meaning people that you would consider Christ or Jesus. Okay, say for instance, Jesus had to be reborn again. He would be probably born into a Pluto and Scorpio generation. And I spoke in another video titled The Exodus Then and Now. Please go check that out, of the Messiah generation and my generation being the Messiah generation. And I actually spoke on that intuitively. It was prior to me having the information that I have now. But that was more of an intuitive comment. However, the Pluto and Scorpio generation of 1983 to 1993 or 95 is considered the ascendant master generation, meaning beings who did reach the Christ consciousness or a higher level of consciousness that passed on a long, long time ago have been reborn in the Pluto and Scorpio generation. And it coincides a little bit with the Uranus to opposition to Chiron generation, because the Uranus opposition to Chiron ends in 1989. So I would say that when most of these ascendant masters were born, the Uranus in opposition to Chiron generation ended. And the reason for that is because if Chiron is the bridge between the last personal planet to more transcendental planets, it would let me know that the children, the ascended masters that were reborn towards the end of that, were born in order to help usher in or to help facilitate that bridge. These ascended masters were born with heavy Chiron energy and a Pluto and sextile, because it just further goes to show that these are highly evolved, or we are highly evolved beings who were reborn in order to help the rest of the collective transcend to the levels that we already did. Okay? This also ties into the Neptune sextile aspect that I also spoke of, which was the second rare transit in our generation from 1950 to 2032. So that would be from the ending of the Piscean age, which is hallmarked by dogmatic religion, Christianity, which is why it's the symbol of the fish. It represents the Piscean age, of which is also ruled by Saturn, of systems, limitations, religion, division, superiority, and those two are just the byproducts of those systems. Um, so it's the ending of the Piscean age, 1950. It's the end of the Piscean age to 2032, the beginning of the Aquarian age. So the Neptune and sextile Pluto is literally a generation of an ending of an age and the beginning of an age. That's Neptune sextile Pluto. Neptune sextile Pluto. Now remember, I spoke that that's one of the two rare transits of our generation. The other one that I was just speaking of, Uranus opposition to Chiron, the generation of the wounded healer. Now, put those together and then you get the purpose of this generation, the bigger purpose of this generation. The 1950, that is the baby boomer generation. I believe that the baby boomer generation started in the 50s. Okay. So this is a generation that is very systematic. In that, in their generation, they had just come out of a war. And they're called the baby boomers because all of the soldiers were back home and they was making babies, and the world was enjoying relative peace and things were good, over here in the West, in the US. Soldiers came home and people were enjoying domestic life with new families, new babies. The jobs were steady. People had steady jobs, and um, things were good. You know, people were becoming educated. Um, Blacks were able or beginning to be able to have more rights that allowed them the opportunity to be educated and have good jobs and be able to take care of their families. So they grew up also during a time where, and I have to, okay, they grew up on both sides, both black and white, during a time where rules and regulations were necessary because we have been fighting wars. And then come the 60s, the civil rights movement came about. So after the 60s, when it got to the 70s, people were ready to get high. They were ready to dance, party, boogie oogie, and enjoy peace, a relative sense of peace. Um, so the 70s heralded that in, the 70s, 80s, 90s, good living, but it was because the country had been through so much turmoil prior to the 50s that it's just like almost like whatever systems were in place to give some sense of normalcy to the country and to the world, it's what everybody needed. Spiritual beliefs, something solid that they can believe in and touch and hold on to. Churches became the cornerstone of almost every community. Um, Here in the West, um, getting a good stable job, that's all they wanted to do. That's what everybody was working towards. Not everybody could, still, not everyone could enjoy a college education. But in those days, just being able to provide for your children and for your family, it was the American dream. So for a lot of our parents and their generation, just getting a good job so that you can survive was the goal. Finding stable employment with a good solid company that you could depend on. Um, that was the goal. And those systems are ruled by Saturn. Heavy government involvement in our day-to-day lives. You know how many government assistance program popped up between 1950 and 1989, the Uranus opposition to Chiron generation, welfare and food stamps and child protective services and government heavily regulated and controlled day-to-day life, your personal day-to-day life, as well as religious institutions who go hand in hand with government, regardless of what they say. But these were all systems put in place in order to facilitate some kind of semblance of control. Um, and maybe at the time, that is what that generation felt like it needed. But ages change, and the Pluto Pluto and Scorpio generation came towards the end of the Uranus opposition to Chiron in order to help break us out of the system, and not just break us out, but tear them down to prepare us for the Pluto sextile Neptune generation, which is the ending of the Piscean age and the beginning of the Aquarian age. So what we saw with both of these two rare transits happening in one lifetime, we saw, to sum it up, we saw the end of one age and the beginning of another age, and then the mediums who help bridge the gap between the change of ages, between the transition. Um, Even though the Uranus opposition to Chiron is the 1950 to 1986 degree, the 1983 to the 1995 are the ones who are coming to really mastermind this transition. Somebody has to be born um, in order to help facilitate the transition between old systems, limitations, restrictions, things that we can see, which is represented by the Piscean age, to which is ruled by Saturn, to the Aquarian age, which isn't as scary as a lot of our Uranus opposition to Chiron would like to believe. And it's just because it's a teardown of the foundations of their beliefs. But this is the way that humanity evolves. There have been many stages of evolution, and all of them were frightening to the people who were caught in the middle of that transition, especially the ones who were more prone to the way things were prior to the transition. It's going to be more harder for them to do the transition. And fortunately for them, before it gets too much for their consciousness to bear, they'll be released. Because Uranus and even Pluto are extremely transformative, and they take your consciousness and then they shake it and then they ball it up and they throw it back at you. And you might be in the condition to pick it up and unravel it and then smooth it out and then roll with it, or you might just be like and then you die. But either way, consciousness has to evolve. And I don't just mean ours, but I mean, or personally, I mean the collective. That is why we see in the world such chaos. We see personal interest groups popping up everywhere. Everybody has a hashtag for a movement. Everybody has a group for their ideas or for their movements. And this isn't the end of the world, it's the end of an age where old systems and beliefs that no longer serve our highest good or no longer serve our next cycle of evolution will have to die. After death comes rebirth. Remember this cycle that I was talking about, my 8th house with Uranus and Saturn? It's why Chiron is so active in my chart, because I am one of those people, not just of the Uranus opposition to Chiron generation, where I was alive to see the old system, but I'm really here to help facilitate the transition between Uranus and Chiron and Pluto sextile Neptune. I'm the Pluto and Scorpio generation, the generation of ascendant masters who already evolves consciousness to a level either higher than the level that we're headed to, or at that level already. We needed to come back in order to facilitate everybody else's transition. It takes one to know one, or it takes one to be one. So that's why the Pluto and Scorpio generation is considered the generation of the ascendant masters, because we've already evolved. We've already reached Christ consciousness prior. Our souls already hold that wisdom, and our life is a life that we live in order to reflect the changes that are coming, and not just reflect them, but help facilitate them. So most people in my generation, we're not understood by our parents, and we barely get understood by the Gen Zers that come after us, because we're not really here for anything other than to go through utter and complete transformations in our life, because they are a sign of the times. So most people in my generation, we go through traumatic transformations that cause our consciousness to be challenged. And either we choose to evolve and accept the challenge, or we choose to stay in a cycle that we're comfortable in. And that is the choice that my generation has, as being the generation of Uranus opposition to Chiron and the generation of Pluto and Scorpio, because we're here to help everyone else evolve by us leading the cause. However, everybody's consciousness can't handle that. Even if their soul has already done it, sometimes you can get stuck in your current consciousness. So not everyone from my generation fulfills that purpose. I think that's why it's a generation where we start seeing more suicides and we start paying more attention to mental health, because and this is a whole other topic that I'll discuss another day, mental health and as it relates to spirituality. I'm a holistic healthcare practitioner. I'm a certified herbalist, and I don't generally tend to go by terms bipolar, schizophrenic, things like that, because those are dismissive terms. They take into account functions of the brain and the mind, but they don't take into account one's spirit and one's emotions. And I believe that emotional trauma is the seat of what doctors call bipolar. It's not really an ailment of the mind, it's emotional. A person being stuck um, in emotional trauma. And of course, our emotions that rule the waters in our body would be the fuel, the chemical fuel that influences our mind, therefore influences our behavior. So even though my generation is the generation that deals more with mental health, it's from a place of having such a higher consciousness, being born with such a higher consciousness into, okay, I'll say being reborn with such a higher consciousness into a world that has not evolved to that level of consciousness yet. So it drives us crazy. On top of that, it causes situations to happen. It causes us to attract situations in our life that are traumatic or chironic in order for us to transcend our human consciousness. So we are literally the prototypes of the ages that we are in between. We are the gaps. And if you pay close enough attention to our lives, you will see that even our lives are a series of transformations, deaths, and rebirths in the circumstances in our lives that present the opportunity for us to transcend or evolve our consciousness. You can't really evolve your consciousness unless your consciousness is triggered by something that makes it uncomfortable. Because when you're comfortable, you don't think to change anything. You're comfortable. But if you are continuously made to be uncomfortable in your life, then you are going to do soul searches for the hidden meanings behind the things that you experience. And then when you go searching, that's when you find things. That's when you find truths and answers. Sometimes you were looking for and sometimes you weren't. But it causes you to evolve in your mind, to evolve in your consciousness. And this is what we are here to do. The generation of Uranus opposition to Chiron is here to be the medium. We are the mediums between the old ways and the new ways. And we are here as well as with the generation of Pluto sextile Neptune to facilitate this transition of consciousness, and not just consciousness, because as above, so below. But since we are transitioning and evolving in consciousness, we see everything here in the material realm evolving as well. Old systems and habits, things that were put in place that served our purpose then but no longer serve them moving forward, are dying down. I saw Facebook on one of my Facebook friends post that posed the question, how come everyone in my generation is leaving the church? And contrary to church teachings, or I would say some religious teachings, because even some of these teachings weren't founded in ancient texts, but this would be a sign that the Antichrist is coming. Quite the contrary. Old things always die away in order for new things to be reborn. And even then, there's nothing new under the sun. So I would like to say that the only thing new about the new coming age of Aquarius is the technology, really, because we are going back to spirituality and self-governing. People no longer feeling like they need to be controlled by rules and regulations um, in the material realm, but also spiritually feeling like I don't need all these rules, regulations, and limitations in order for me to understand my organic relationship with the divine. My generation has kind of popularized the resurgence of a lot of mystical techniques, metaphysical techniques, a lot of ancient Eastern um, techniques in order for one to evolve or raise their consciousness or find God or connect with a higher source. Because before, in the Piscean age, there was really only one way you can do it, and that's to go to church, whether it be Catholic church, Presbyterian church, Baptist church, non-denominational, but you had to go to somebody's church, and you had to have a pastor or a minister be the median between you and your relationship with God. My generation has come to say, okay, we were here before, for one, and we've left here before, two, and that is not the way to do it. Let us free the people. Let us free them from their limitations and their bondage and allow them to be what they were always supposed to be. And that is children of God experiencing God for God. We're all here to experience God so that we can report back to the source, so that it can take all of our consciousness from our soul's experience and then merge it with its consciousness. I'm going to end this with a saying, and this is one of the 7 laws of nature, 7 laws of God, the principle of mentalism, or the law of mentalism, which is the all is mind, the universe is mental. All creation exists in the mind of God, meaning God wanted to be conscious of itself. And so we were created with our own consciousness in order to have our own experiences that are collected within our Akashic DNA, our Akashic records, our soul. And then eventually, as we evolve our consciousness, we get back to the point where we are remerged or back together with Source. Because at the end of the day, God needed to experience itself. It needed to be conscious of itself. So we are almost like carriers. We have all of these experiences in multiple lifetimes and multiple dimensions that God created so that God can experience itself through us and our consciousness. The all is mind. God, the universe is a mental, and all was created in God's mind. The purpose of us being born is to allow God to create or experience itself. So we cannot stay the same because God has experienced that aspect of itself. Collectively, we have to continue to evolve because eventually God is going to want its information back. It's going to want its experiences back. And so our souls are striving to learn and to experience all of God's creation so that God can experience all of its creation. This is why we are all the children of God, because we were created. We were created. Therefore, God needed to experience itself through us and through, how do I word this? Through us, but through the wheel of fortune, the wheel of the zodiac. We have multiple lives. We've been multiple variations of natal charts. You know, we've had so many different experiences with the planets and aspects and different lifetimes. We've had so many soul experiences. And we still have a lot more after we pass on from this life, even if we have to come back and experience more lessons in this realm. When we finish, we go off into other realms and experience things. So our souls are ancient. They're ancient souls. And just imagine how much wisdom and experience we hold in our soul. This is why we have dreams and visions of things that never happened before in our past or haven't happened yet. Because our soul has experienced them on some level, whether we're conscious of that or not. But to wrap it up, this is the manifestation or the interpretation of the two rare transits of my generation, the 1950, I would say, to 1995 generation. And that is Uranus opposing Chiron, Pluto sextile Neptune, and I even threw Pluto and Scorpio in there because that is the generation of the ascendant masters, those who came already with a Christ consciousness within their soul's memory, prepared to help us bring about a transformation in ages, and also prepare us to change or to evolve consciously through the teachings of Chiron and Christ. Self-service, sacrifice, love. If you want to evolve quicker and purge more karma, that means get rid of a lot of karma faster so that you can evolve quicker versus waiting lifetimes and lifetimes to let go of one karma and one karma. Sacrifice yourself. And I don't mean slit your throat in a bucket and then set yourself on fire as a burnt offering. What I mean is allow the lessons that you learn in this life and the painful lessons that you learned in this life to help you transcend in your mind, in your consciousness. And then you go and you make yourself of service to the collective. And you be selfless when you do it because you know that that is love. That is how you become a student of Chiron, and that is how you actually practice what Christianity is supposed to be teaching. And I'll stop it at there, but I'll just repeat the principle of mentalism or the law of mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental, and all creation exists in the mind of God, or the universe, or whatever you need to call it. And with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you next week, and good night.